Right. Yeah, I am going to find that article,
Uh-huh.
and I will link it so that everybody can have it. And these, I tried to do about 3 artists per section, and there we go. So that you're not like deluged with a whole bunch of different people,
Mm-hmm.
but it, I like having sometimes the videos will have uh, like bios about the artist, and sometimes they'll show specific artwork by the person, which is, I don't know, I think it's kind of nice to have that kind of mix. And most of these are pretty decent, even if occasionally there is a really, if you have access to 11 Labs, use that for your AI voiceover. Don't use the horrible ones that some of these videos that I share with you have, because they're really awful. Like Dutchamp, I hate that. Okay. All right. I'm going to share this. Oh, and I also include. So, do you remember that video we watched a couple months ago? Who decides what art means?
Yeah.
Okay, and it's
Yes.
you as an observer, as a viewer, have every much as a right to decide what the art means as anybody else. To
Right.
decide what the art means for your experience. We don't have the right to tell other people what it means for them. I mean, that's where you start diving into propaganda. And propaganda is material that uses the tools of art to engage somebody with the intent of forcing their thinking.
Mm.
And that's the intent is very different than art. Mao Zedong, when he created basically the People's Republic of China, declared that all art was propaganda. And if
Mm.
it was not propaganda, it did not deserve to be called art. But this is Clement Greenberg right here. And this is just a couple minutes long, but this is where it talks about his theory of art, which I do not necessarily agree with. You can tell that I'm a proponent of the idea that you help generate the meaning. I'm very much, um, uh, and of course the word escapes me. I'm very much a phenomenologist, and I believe that as an
Um,
experiencer of reality, you have the right and the necessity of helping to create what the reality is through your understanding of it and your
mm.
appreciation of it. Now, so let's go back up and look at this. And I want to add to that minute and a half thing we just watched. Most of the artists that we look at, I mean, almost all of them have primary media that they're working with. Sometimes the media is steel and glass. Sometimes it's concrete. Sometimes it's paint. Sometimes it's metal and wood. Sometimes it's a mixture of many different things. But at the end, the thing that you're looking at is the artwork that they're producing that hopefully gets you to engage in some sort of a conversation with an avatar of that artist in your imagination.
Right.
The difference between that and conceptual art is, well, Frank Lloyd Wright is using an eraser at the draft table or a crowbar at the building site. Well, Van Gogh was using paints and a paintbrush.
Mm-hmm.
The conceptual artist uses the object as their tool. So everybody else uses tools to create an object. The conceptual artists use the object that's created as their tool. And what they're creating, what they're sculpting, what they're building is specifically the thoughts in your mind. It must depend on an engaged viewer who wants to help construct the meaning. This ties right back to Picasso, who said he really depended on he needed you to be smart. He needs human beings to be smart to engage with his artwork. And that's how most artists feel. They want you, they depend on you to be smart, to have a conversation with them in the realm of the art. And that's the big difference. The conceptual artist, their medium, the end result of what they're building is as concept in your mind. And their tool is every other artist's medium.
Can they use, like, can conceptual art have traditional medium, but
Oh
used in a conceptual way?
yeah.
Oh,
And
okay.
just like Yves Klein, he was in large part he was a conceptual as well. He used blue paint, Klein blue,
Yeah.
and models to paint with, and everybody thought it was just an avant-garde art piece, but he was using those traditional media, with the injection of the models' bodies to create something inside of your mind, so you were forced to think about the commodification of women.
Mm.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's it's
Yeah.
it's a specific difference, but it can be subtle. So Joseph Kosuth, he did a lot of stuff where he has these ideas of multiple chairs or multiple clocks, multiple shovels. And if we look at this, what's the one shovel? Well, the fact that they're all shovels. This is a definition of a shovel, a picture of a shovel, and a shovel of a shovel. But what's the three shovels? Well, again, this is the physical shovel. This is the idea of a shovel, and
Okay.
this is a photo of a shovel. So once they are very different and distinct, but at the other side, they're all perspectives of the same thing.
Mm.
And so he's forcing you to engage. Well, he's inviting you to engage with the idea that it's worth thinking about what makes something the thing that it is.
Mm-hmm.
What's our relationship with it? Now, one of the artists that I really enjoy looking at is Adrian Piper. And what we have, they did a lot of installations, and a lot of the times they were things where it would be like a photo with the faces blurred and something typed to make you think.
Mm-hmm.
But they normally weren't creating the photos specifically for you to look at as photos. They were creating this kind of visual environment for you to think about the message and to start thinking about it. Not telling you what to think. Propaganda tells you what to think, but inviting you to participate in the generation of ideas.
Mm.
And so, this is an article about them, and then we also have a video about them. And I'm looking to see, it's about a 5-minute video. I don't know if I want to watch that right now.
No worries.
I do want to share these artists with you. So we looked at Adrian Piper, think photos with faces blurred out to engage you in the generation of ideas.
Okay.
And Onkawara, their stuff is a little bit different. So we look at Joseph Kosuth, it's physical objects with definitions and photos. Adrian Piper is basically generative prompts for your brain, with these odd photos, odd imagery, taken totally out of context, inviting you to think about something. And then what Onkawara does very specifically is he finds things that we take for granted, like binders, postcards, things like that. They're just stuff we would get without thinking to mail home to grandma, so she knows we are thinking about her on this trip we're taking. And she would say, well, if you really love me, you would have brought me on the trip with you. But, that's passive aggressive grandma. That probably tells you more about my background than yours. But so Onkawara would do things that were completely banal, completely mundane. And then I wonder why it's not showing up. That's kind of weird. and then create. I'm sorry that it is not showing up. I don't know why.
You're talking
But
about the postcard?
this part is showing up, but I could not get. Oh yeah, okay, it is showing up. All right, excellent. Okay, was it showing up on my computer?
Gotcha.
Okay, so what Onkawara is doing is stamping things and using, like Andy Warhol was using traditional materials that were used in banal advertising. Onkawara goes one step further, where they're just using the most mundane, trivial, thoughtless things they can. You know, this all looks like typical automatic stamping that you'd see when something was put through the post office without really any human contact at all. And generating an idea that I think it really presages what we see today in the social media influence medium, where people will have a complete and total fabricated setup, you know, a curated image of themselves showing them, quote unquote, living their best life, all made up and every, you know, it's designed like most of these reality shows, you know, we've all loved and watched, where
Duh.
it fabricates a sense of connection when you really know in your heart that there's no connection there.
Mm.
And so you get this where basically in that typical font that's used in post offices around the world, I got up at 10:20 a.m. and postcards sent to somebody, completely impersonal, you know, and on every level. And this is sent to somebody in Italy, and sometimes it would be people that the artist had connections with. Sometimes it would be random names, and then the postcards would be later collected and then put on display. But it just kind of shows that this passionate pseudo connection building.
Wait, did he
That
send them?
yeah, he actually did,
Shush. That's cool.
and you know that was part of the art, the conceptualism, and which just really very cool stuff. eh, Thinking about the work going into it, and then they would be displayed in gallery settings,
Mhm.
or sometimes like he came across Mark Twain famously wrote in a journal every day since the time he was about 10 years old,
Mhm.
and whole summers would go by where the only thing he wrote would be got up, washed, went to bed. And that's the kind of thing that influences these, which are binders of completely banal, ordinary statements, you know, journal entries that mean absolutely nothing to anybody.
Uh-huh.
But it's a demonstration. I mean, this calls up thoughts of, does, you know, questions about, does my life have any meaning?
Uh-huh.
Can I connect with somebody else? What constitutes actual connection?
Hmm.
And I hope, can you see how that is presaging um, like contemporary influencer culture on YouTube and TikTok and stuff like that? I think it's really some very very cool stuff. Now, is it art? Well, we can make that argument for and against, I believe, um, and I think there's compelling ways to look at it in both directions. Is it art? If we consider that the medium they are working with is your thoughts, I think it absolutely is art. If we're thinking, okay, these guys are just trying to pull one over on art critics and have people, the decision makers, decide it's art, take that um, opportunity out, you know, that right out of our hands as
Mm.
a mindless sheeple public, then it's not art. It's just an excuse to get paid for something.
Mm.
Except for when you consider the fact that most of those conceptual artists were not expecting to get paid. They were
Right.
doing the things specifically to get people to think, not to make money. Now, some of the things like Solowit's work, where his art was in creating a certificate of authenticity attached to a set of directions that the museum could purchase for an expression on a specific date. And then those directions would either be expressed or performed, sometimes by paid people, sometimes by volunteers. And it'd be things like get a piece of paper of a certain size, attach it to a wall, and write or draw a line that is not parallel to the edge of the paper and is not entirely consistent with its distance from the edge of the paper. And then repeat. What you would get is a notebook-sized piece of paper where people would scribble a line and then people would kind of match that line going down. Sometimes you get the museum would put up a piece of paper that was the size of an entire wall and have people climb up on ladders to start drawing the lines. But it was an engagement on thoughts of where does the art lie? Well, he's the guy who thought of it. He's the guy who generated this whole concept that people were kind of enjoying the game of buying the certificate of authenticity. Now, which a friend of mine, have you watched, what was the movie about P.T. Barnum?
Oh,
the musical?
yeah, Greatest Showman.
Greatest Showman. P.T. Barnum was the guy that really popularized this, put it into the public sphere, but it was not unique to him at all. But he would create fabricated curiosities and generate a completely fictional story about their authenticity, and then create a certificate of authenticity, go with the story and the curiosity. That's where you get the Fiji mermaid, all these kinds of things.
Bearded lady,
but
yeah.
What was so fun about that is I think this is really the birth of this idea of conceptual art, because he's inviting people to kind of enjoy being part of the game. You know it's pretend, you know it's fake. There was no pretense that it was a real mermaid. It's obviously not. But with the certificate of authenticity, you can clown around with your friends and pretend that you believe, oh no, it's real. And what that did is you would have people going to this sideshow portion. They would pay for the first time through, get a little bit irritated, then start laughing about it. Then they would invite their friends. They go with their friends through it again, and then those people would bring their friends. And it was just a way of sharing the in joke, and it was just an awful lot of fun. It's like the song Louie Louie became incredibly popular, even though the federal government. Do you remember the commission on phonographic records that was to determine whether or not Satanism was in the tracks? That commission, that federal commission, actually played Louie Louie at all speeds, forward and backwards, and determined that there was absolutely no meaning whatsoever to the song. That was the official federal commission pronouncement. But everybody loved it to the point that it topped the billboards.
Yeah.
Because everybody was in on the joke.
They all wanted to be in on it.
Yeah, and that's the kind of fun thing about conceptual art. But it also really makes you think. Like Jean-Claude and Christo, about 20 years ago, did something called I think it was called the Islands in Florida, where with dying tourism, Floridians in this small area and a dying manatee population, Floridians in the small area invited Jean-Claude and Christo to wrap some of their islands with these piers of plastic to bring public attention back to Florida, and hopefully engage people and give people jobs. So Jean-Claude and Christo, they procured millions of dollars of grants, paid these people so that they could build these things with these grants that they have procured. Part of it was every time somebody would rent a boat to go and check these things out, they were also told about safety around manatees and why manatees were dying, because people were using illegal boat propellers. And so at the end of it, people were saying, oh, it's a waste of time. It's not really art. But all these people in the community, the entire community around this area was completely revitalized because of the conceptual art that Jean-Claude and Christo had created. It's a beautiful thing.
You know how much I love Banksy. Have you seen his thing, Dismal Land?
No.
So he basically he took a basic like a desolate area, and he turned it into a broken down Disney World, but he called it Dismal Land. And he got his people to get all these people to work it, but he told them they were just working on a movie set. So here comes the public to this place, and I swear, if you can find a picture of it, it's hilarious. It's not hilarious, it's actually quite grotesque, but he, he has all these people working it. All these tourists are showing up, paying money to get into this thing called Dismal Land. And it's all this rundown, broken down, just, you know, it's that kind of thing is like, okay, what what happened? Like, how is it that nobody figured it out, It was just, I don't know. It was really interesting to me. And that kind of idea of like, that's conceptual art in my opinion. Um
Yeah, you
like,
can see, these things are just falling down,
yeah.
falling apart.
Yeah.
Looks like a
And
set of a Silent Hill.
yeah, and here come the tourists thinking it's just a theme park.
Yeah, that's really, and the roots of these kinds of ideas, even though this is very contemporary, the roots of those ideas started way, 50 years ago, more than 50
Sure.
years.
And I think that's the thing about like I have a hard time with conceptual art sometimes. I think a lot of it is about reading and understanding what the artist is trying to do with the concept. But I also think if we're not pushing boundaries, if conceptual art doesn't happen, then postmodernism doesn't happen, then contemporary doesn't happen. Like it's got to be what's next. It's that
Well,
experimentation that helps us get to the next level.
when I said that all art is conceptual, but conceptualism is not all art. Um, all art is designed to engage. The artist is saying something to somebody somewhere,
Right.
and they want to engage your thoughts on some level. And but conceptualism, the difference is it is specifically designed to make you think about something, not telling you what to think, but to make you think about something.
Right.
And I think that's a perfect segue. We're talking
The
about
Guernica?
Banksy, yeah, to the next section, and this is basically art activism.
Yeah.
Now, this Guernica, this is a mosaic that was commissioned from Picasso's Guernica. Francisco Franco was friends with the Nazis and the fascists during World War II. A truly evil and despicable uh, creature carrying human DNA. When he was gifted by the Nazis with one of these 2-mile artillery guns, he picked a target at random and blasted it out of existence. And this is Guernica. For absolutely no reason, the leader that had promised to protect them for the rest of their lives randomly chose Guernica and destroyed it until there was not 2 sticks together.
Huh.
It was, and this is what Pablo Picasso was doing. And of course, Pablo Picasso was Spanish, living in France. But after he did this, his life was in danger by
Yeah.
the government and by people that supported Francisco Franco until all those people died.
Yeah.
And the painting Guernica, the actual painting, was guarded for most of its gallery showing until after those people died, with guards with machine guns. Because there were several attempts to destroy it because it was so. I mean, it looks harsh, it looks terrible, it looks horrid because that's what it's portraying. But the reason why I start this, even though Picasso was not an art activist as we would think about it in this section, what he did was create art to make you think to the point where uh, Aristotle called it a forced catharsis,
Mm-hmm.
where you are in whatever the thoughts are that you have is something that you can't turn away from when you
Right.
look at this painting. And art activism, I love. So look at some of these things. The difference between art activism and propaganda, and we're going to point these out quite a bit, is art activism is where people use all sorts of tools, like, for example, conceptual art, or oil paint, or street art, or Banksy,
Yeah.
the pseudo graffiti or graffiti, where people use those kinds of things specifically to engage a network ideas around issues that are important to them.
Hmm.
And again, they're not telling you what to think, but they are telling you with some urgency it is important to engage with thoughts about this topic.
Hmm.
And Keith Haring, what he was doing for most of his art constructing life, until he died, was desperately trying to get people to feel some sort of desperation about the idea that it's important to find connection.
Hmm.
It's important to create connection. And uh, he is also labeled as an AIDS activist, but I think it's a lot more than that. Uh, I'll show you just a little bit of Keith Haring. And the reason why I say it's more than that is um, he's not telling you what to think. He's not promoting himself as a victim of anything. What he is doing is telling you that there are issues that are important. Now, in this, yeah, it looks for like a sign that's anti-drug. Okay. Um, he used drugs himself. What this is more of is something to get you to think about what is going on with the concept of the war on drugs.
Mm.
So crack is whack is not the message that he is telling you to think about. The whole object is to invite you to think about our relationship with both the drug czar in the US, drug culture, counterculture, all sorts of different kinds of things. Are all drugs bad? Well, they aren't. I know many people whose lives were saved by oncology medicines.
Mm.
Marijuana is one of the very few things for somebody who is dying of consumptive illness, or dying of AIDS,
Yeah.
or similar things. Marijuana or Parkinson's. Uh, one of the Marijuana is one of the very few things that actually can return to them a valued life, where they can
Hmm.
actually eat, where they can actually participate with their friends. They're not drugged out of their skull on painkillers, and they
Right.
can actually enjoy their passage out of this life. To the point where they're engaging with friends and family and getting their taste buds back. So there is a spectrum of things, but this is the the gift that Keith Haring had, was engaging you with this idea that human beings are beings that desperately need connection. These icons. Is this a person getting ready to run a race? Yes. It is. Is it a portrait of the Christ child? Yes.
Right.
There are all sorts of things that he does to um, bring together all sorts of expectations. And one of the big things that he was doing was helping people to realize and address the fact that human beings are human beings. Whether or not you appreciate or don't somebody else's perspective doesn't matter. They are still human beings.
Right.
Allen Ginsberg is an artist who is known for his writing. But one thing that he did that I particularly enjoyed is he just had a cheap camera, a disposable camera that he'd go around and he would engage with people and take photos of them. And sometimes you would see the photo just by itself. Sometimes you would see a journal entry about the photo. Sometimes he would write an extensive interaction that he had with the people or the objects in the photo. And sometimes he wouldn't. It may just make you think about it.
Hmm.
But again, like, it's very interesting that both of these guys were in time periods where a lot of human beings felt very disconnected. And it's fascinating that he is expressing some sort of uh, uh, engagement with the idea that people need to be connected, whether or not you appreciate the connections, whether or not you think that those connections are right or wrong, makes a lot less difference than the fact that you recognize human beings are desperate for connection and they need connection. So, and
And
I think that those are fascinating.
wasn't it argued? So I went to Naropa, which is a university in Colorado that was founded by the Beat Poets. It was founded by Allen Ginsberg and Anne Waldman. And so I was lucky enough to be able to do I wrote a show, an interview style show from all of their wives. And at one point, weren't they calling beat poetry conceptual art? Because they couldn't, they didn't want to, it was rejecting the normalities of poetry and the, constraints of it all and trying to bring out the loftier idea. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, and it wasn't just the beat poets. There were several different groups of poets that were doing the same kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
um, where they were getting you to engage with the idea of what's the value of the printed word? What does
Yeah.
it mean? What does it represent? Does it even have to have a word? What's the value of printing as a whole?
Mm-hmm.
There were several poets that would do poem. They would call them poems, but they looked like almost diagrams where they would just use punctuation.
And
And
William
they use
Burroughs
forms
cutting
of
them up, the
punctuation.
cut ups and everything.
Sometimes it would just be typewriter on paper.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite conceptual poets is Victor Borge.
Mm-hmm.
He was called a musical comedy professional, but he did several things where he would engaging humor as his tool. He would
Mm-hmm.
engage you in a process of thinking about communication. Like Little Rat Riding Hood is a really good one, or Little Rat Rotten Hut. And what in that he told a whole story, not with the words that the story actually needs to be make sense, but with other words that sounded very similar. So when you read it out loud, it sounded like the story. And
Huh.
another one he did was verbal punctuation. So look up both of those, Victor Borge, verbal punctuation, and Ladle Rat Rotten Hut. And
Yeah.
you can find those performances on YouTube, and they're hilarious.
Awesome.
But that I don't know if people realized that he was a conceptual artist as well as being an entertainer and a comedian,
Yeah.
but he very much was. And he started doing that, at about the same time as these other people were looking at.
Right.
Now, when we're looking at art activism, there are art activists like Aaron Douglas. I think we can consider him a progenitor of the art activists, as well as the Mexican muralists, because of the stuff that they did. But specifically, they were targeting messages that are important for people to think about. And
Mm.
the difference is the art activists are intentionally trying to engage audiences in thoughts and conversations about specific topics. And what I wanted to share is about a 6-minute video. And this is an interview on the Stephen Colbert Show by the Guerrilla Girls. And I don't know if everybody knows who the Guerrilla Girls are. The Guerrilla Girls are a number of artists. Some of them consider themselves in their day jobs feminist artists, others don't. But they wear gorilla masks so that they can maintain anonymity. And they
Mm.
bring attention to people to the fact that women are very disproportionately misrepresented in art.
Yeah.
And you'll hear some statistics during this that I think are rather surprising. I think that's a pretty good introduction to what is going to be known as feminist art.
Mm.
And the three artists that I have here are all feminist art. And what's interesting is, to me, again, they are not telling you what to think. What they are doing is focusing on specific issues that are very important to them.
Mm.
And one of my favorites will always be Judy Chicago. But let's see if I can find an image. She did something called the dinner party. And I'm going to see if I can find an image of that. You can find a lot of this watching these videos and stuff. We don't have a lot of time to watch that. Please do when watch those videos as you can. Excuse me. The dinner party is basically she made a set of settings in this long triangular table, and each setting represents a different aspect of the sacred feminine or the divine feminine. Sometimes they're for specific people, sometimes they're for specific faith pathways, but they're all based on predominantly feminine imagery. And what I really appreciate about this is, again, she is not writing placards telling you what to think. What she is doing is engaging you with things that are focused around the divine or sacred feminine, but inviting you to engage with it however you want to.
Mm-hmm.
But that is her principal subject matter. And again, it's not propaganda because it's not forcing you to think one way or another. It's just showing you things that you are not used to seeing,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is a really good thing that art can do. And then we have Faith Ringgold.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to me because Faith Ringgold does a lot of work that, again, it reminds me quite a bit of Aaron Douglas and the Harlem Renaissance. And there are images that are sometimes really difficult to engage with, difficult to see. And like Carol Walker is another person who does some really difficult images that are hard to look at. But again, she's doing something where she is asking you to engage with ideas. She's not telling you what to think, but she is presenting information in a way that we normally do not see.
Mm-hmm.
And people have said, oh, her stuff is propaganda. What's fascinating to me, though, is the people that say that, the hallmarks that they use to define her work as propaganda are the hallmarks that they dismiss that is present in other artwork that they claim is not propaganda. So, if you're going to put labels on something, that's fine. It doesn't matter. But it's okay. It's perfectly fine to be consistent with your labels.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Ana Mendieta is a Cuban, and what she does is not only deal with the earth as her tool. This is what she's making, but she's making activist art that engages recontextualization of ancient imagery that I think is very easy to associate, again, with the divine feminine or the sacred feminine. And her work usually deals with specific imagery that is based on very ancient cave art, petroglyphs,
Mm-hmm.
and the idea that the earth is a mother and is a womb. She used her own body as a canvas quite a bit. So be careful when you do research on her. Be careful because if you're not ready for that, it can be a little bit startling. She did not engage with propaganda. She did not engage with pornography. She did use her body as a canvas.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the difference is pornography is designed to commodify the human form. Ana Mendieta was specifically using her body as a canvas, not bio. So I have about another 10 minutes. Kelly, if it's okay, would you mind staying with me for another 10 minutes?
Yeah, I'm great. I think I have 10 minutes of battery left in the laptop.
Okay, great. Now, the third section I want to talk about is Earth as the medium. And a couple of these things are in Utah. Nancy Holt, her sun tunnels, these are in Utah. They're out by the salt flats. And what she did is she used the gigantic cement pipes that people use in high volume sewer systems. And she drilled holes in them so at certain times of year, when you get inside these pipes, these are, well, these mimic star constellations that you see in these areas at certain times
Mm.
of year. But they're also intended to call to mind ancient earthenworks that prehistorical humans created that responded to archaeoastronomy. Things like the stones in Stonehenge,
Mm.
for example. And land art, this is where we start. This is a video that talks about Jean-Claude and Christo and rapping, but this specifically shows those Florida islands, and then it talks about other examples of land art. And look at this um, article as well from the Tate, where it talks about people going out and specifically making things in the land. Now, there are several prehistorical sites where this happened. The first thing that comes to my mind looking at this image is the Nazca Plain,
Right.
the gigantic earthwork petroglyphs there. And there are other things as well, but this is something that people started doing again with conceptual art. The similar thing is they weren't looking to engage people with gallery structured encounters with art, but they're creating environments so that human beings can go out and just happen on this art. And
Mm.
it's designed more often than not just to kind of become part of the environment. Now, this is Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty. It's in the Great Salt Lake here in Utah. One of the things that he loved about Utah was all the petroglyphs and the rock art. And he loved that idea that over time these things will kind of become part of the natural environment. And Spiral Jetty, every year somebody wants to go out and restore it to its former magnificence, but that goes directly against what Robert Smithson said about it, because he
Mm.
said it was supposed to fade into the landscape
Mm.
and become part of it, just like all the other natural art that is in Utah. So this is a really good 4 or 5 minute video about Robert Smithson. So definitely watch that. And Nancy Holt, the difference between these is Robert Smithson a lot of the times would use naturally occurring objects to create with, and Nancy Holtz a lot of the times would also use cement, like those cement pipes. Both of them were trying to engage people on that same kind of numinous thought that goes behind these really intriguing sculptural and architectural endeavors that our ancestors thousands of years ago worked on. Like some of the oldest land art in the world is in South Africa. It's called uh, either Adam's Garden or Adam's Clock.
Mm.
And it looks like worked stones that were transported to where they are now under intelligent direction. And these, depending on who you talk to, date back to 200,000 to almost 2 million years ago.
Mm.
Just the oldest tools in the world were found in China. They're about 1 million years old. So Adam's garden, Adam's calendar is another word for it. Very
Mm.
interesting, but it's mysterious because we don't know exactly. Nobody's told us what to think about it, and that's what these guys like to engage with. They like to build these things that are going to stand the test of time,
Mm.
and we don't know exactly what they mean. Then Agnes Dennis is somebody. She worked a little bit different way than the previous two, where she is interested in working with maps and how they distort our perception of the world.
Mm.
And so she would do different objects and use the same kind of mathematical distortion that was used to create flat maps of the world and translate that mathematical language to different platonic solids,
Mm.
different structures.
That's
And
cool.
she also, one of my favorite works that she did was she created a very interesting uh, spiral network of trees where she planted the trees. And now you can actually see this forest. When you go above and look down below, it looks like a galaxy of trees because of the spirals that she planted the trees in.
That's
And,
cool.
so she just created it and then left it alone. Hassan Fathi uses architectural and natural materials to
Mm.
engage with the idea of architecture that people may or may not want to personally engage with, but that looks like it is a part of the shaped environment.
Mm.
Very interesting. He's Egyptian, so a lot of his stuff has this very Muslim looking aspect to it. He used the Wadi arch, which is this kind of pointed square arch. It's not quite the Gothic arch, but it's designed specifically to provide natural air conditioning. When these arches are about 15 to 20 feet high, the air gets trapped inside of it and whirls around, so that if you are going to one of these ancient oases that have these Wadi arches in them, they are called Wadis. They're kind of like the ancient world's version of the Airbnb. Then you would have a natural air conditioning because it would trap and recycle the air to cool it down.
Mhm.
And then James Wine, he did stuff that was very specifically site specific, and some really odd, interesting things that you look at some of this stuff and you think, oh, that is just too weird. But this is going to be an expression of an area's watershed. And then when you realize that, you think, oh, holy cow. So he'll do things where he'll make castings of where water might drain through the land and create these really interesting structures. So it's very, very fascinating. Oh, I'm sorry, you can't see this. Here, I was looking at this. So this is actually an abstraction of a watershed, water drainage.
Oh, that's cool.
And then how water might drain through an environment as it sinks down into the earth.
Huh.
So very, very cool stuff.
That's awesome.
And what is important about this in the 60s, it opens up the door for all sorts of different ways that artists can express themselves using media that nobody ever thought about before. On any sort of I'm not going to say nobody ever thought about. Nobody ever thought about it in the accepted art world. We'll say that.
Yeah, well.
So do you have any last minute observations or questions as your batteries are dying?
No, I'm working on a conceptual piece though, but I'm using clay and it's working out. So I'll send you pictures and you can tell me if I'm headed in the right direction.
All right, that'll be great.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to point out that the difference between conceptual art and other forms of art is that with conceptual art, the artist uses the traditional media that we accept as art. They use that media as their tool, and their actual media is concepts, which is why it's called conceptual art.
Yeah. And that helps. That's yeah.
And anybody can do this when you look at it from the frame of mind that you're sculpting an idea in somebody's mind. And even if we talk about art activism and all this other stuff, this is not propaganda, because propaganda tells you what you have to be thinking. Activist art engages you with a specific set of ideas or a specific cultural phenomenon, very targeting that phenomenon or that idea.
Right.
So, which I think is just, instead of like the Cubists and Bauhaus, they address those ideas in a different way, but they were addressing those ideas by using their perception and understanding of those ideas instead of using their medium to get you to think about something different. And I just think it's really very interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, thank you, Kelly, for being here tonight.
Yeah,
and
glad to be
who
back.
watches the recording. And I am really glad to see how many people are progressing. Again, turn in stuff that you have not turned in. If you feel you need more time, contact me right away. And if you have questions about what to do regarding your projects, work on that. Contact me right away, ask me questions, and I will be happy to help. Like Kelly did. She wanted to make a 20-foot tall sculpture that would take her 3 years to complete. I got her to whittle it down, so it's only going to take her 60 hours.
It's only gonna be 1,200 pieces, so don't worry. And that is down from $5,000, so don't even worry.
Awesome.
Hey, thanks for everything. I appreciate you.
You're welcome. And I will see you guys next week. And I think that next week will be our last time together. And then
everybody has to show up. All you people who have never come to one of these, get off the couch. You're paying for this class. Come do a conversation, just one. Please.
Please.
I want to meet you all. Okay.
And we will also do the final, and I'll talk about the final next week. So remind me about that. The final is not what you're expecting. It's not a test like you're used to taking tests. It is completely different.
Cool.
And the final is open for everybody to take all through finals week. But in order to get the grade you earn, you need to take the final. By department mandate, if you decide not to take the final, you can lose up to a full letter grade.
Mm.
So don't do that. But again, you have all week long to take it and submit it. All right, guys, we'll see you next week and weekend. Till then, be safe, be happy, and try not to get sick.
Great. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye.
Thank you.